Ladies and gentlemen, you have to believe me that I'm the mayor, because I'm just 34, so it's hard to believe sometimes. It's hardly necessary for me to say that I'm consider it a very great honor to be asked to occupy this platform for a few next moments. As you are aware, I'm coming from Prague, which at the end of 1989, much like Kiev a few short months ago, became the center of anti-government protests that set into motion the process of dismantling the communist regime and gradually incorporating Czech Republic into European and Euro-Atlantic structures. This, at least in terms of the European and economic dimension, it's also the long-term strategic goal of Ukraine. Our Velvet Revolution, this process began to be called due to its non-violent character, evoked enormous expectations, many of which were not met, despite the fact that we had, I think, more than a better starting position. I'm afraid that in this regard, our experience isn't unique, and that the other countries of the former Soviet bloc experience similar setbacks. But I don't want to speak here about expectations and disappointments. Rather, I would like to use this opportunity to attempt to point out some of the major errors we made. If we can't provide a functional how-to plan, then at least an open and honest confession of our problems might help you to not set out on the same wrong path. What our advantages were and what they consisted of. No blood was spilled, and thus society wasn't excessively radicalized. Second, the Velvet Revolution brought Václav Havel to the fore, a person of much greater weight and importance than could be expected of the relatively small Czechoslovakia. 3. The exceptionally favorable international political climate caused by the fall of the Iron Curtain and collapse of the Soviet bloc. And 4. Democratic tradition of the first Czechoslovak Republic between the world wars. We believed we could resume something about which we evidently had a rather naive and overly optimistic notion. What happened to our advantages? Many critics say that almost all of them dissolve in the void of the everyday. First, the tone of conciliation that Velvet Revolution took towards its opponents, best expressed in the slogan, "We are not like them," created a space in which these opponents could survive almost entirely without any problem, and where the so-called milkers of socialism could very quickly re-establish themselves. The individuals who had learned their way around the grey economic zone of the socialist Czechoslovakia found much greater opportunities in the unregulated environment of the pseudo-market economy. Second, the enthusiasm, attention and respect that the world poured on Václav Havel seemed to overflow to the whole of Czechoslovakia, but this wasn't in fact the case. We were just one of many countries whose problems and feelings earned only as much attention as their human and economic potential deserved. 3. Once the euphoria from the fall of the Iron Curtain wore off, it quickly became clear that we hadn't reached the end of history, and new problems and challenges arose. And 4. Picking up where the First Republic left off turned out to be impossible. We had completely different model of social, legal, and economic development. I'm aware of the fact that I'm an outside observer and thus not entirely informed, so I hope you will forgive my directness in saying that I'm convinced that your starting position is considerably worse than ours was. The communists did not rule for 40 years. in Ukraine like in Czechoslovakia, but for 70. There is no personality like Václav Havel. Society has become radicalized and there is intense external pressure and interest for things to remain that way. Your economy also contains players with extremely problematic pasts, and so really the only advantage I can see on your side at this moment is the currently favorable international climate, but the question is how long it will last. What to do in such a situation? I believe that there is a positive course and that it is hidden precisely in the name of this panel, how one can change the history, civil society. Why civil society? The events we were witness to at Maidan, as well as before that in the context of the colors revolutions or Arab Spring, have one common denominator. They are the proof and at the same time the accusation that the discussion between citizens, holders of political power, is not working and in many cases is completely absent. The political elites in the Arab nations, much like the political elites in the post-Soviet countries, endlessly appealed to stability, but were unable to recognize that their regimes were not stable but stagnant. Many of their top representatives, and in this I think there is an advantage for you, never understood or did not want to understood that the greatest advantage the West has is a stability which is constantly renewed by way of permanent discussion. The very thing that the others are afraid of is our greatest advantage. It means the possibility of expressing a differing opinion openly and without fear and attempting to build up the public support for it. I believe that this is both the greatest and the most difficult task that stands before you if you really want to pave a path to Europe. It's not easy to take on foreign models and legal standards, methods of economic management, etc. Here I can once again share with you our own negative experiences. After November 1989 in Czechoslovakia, that time we were truly left to our own fate for the first time in the modern history. Without even being aware of it from the start, we could and needed to start taking care of ourselves. But before we had a chance to get our bearings, the helm was grabbed by those who managed to very skillfully, in the form of an invisible symbiotic parasitism, tie their own fate to the fate of us all by infiltrating the newly formed political parties and through them beginning to siphon off from the public budgets. In the end, the possibly worst situation developed in the capital city in Prague, which with its economical potential, big city anonymity, a huge budget, and constant presence of corrupt, or in some cases naive representative of central political power provided an extremely attractive playing field for representatives of the grey political economic sector. Major cities, Prague in the context of Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, Kyiv in the context of the Ukraine, have the best natural conditions for civil society to not only germinate but also to grow, organize and express itself publicly. After 40 years of communist rule, however, our society wasn't used to an open and pluralist exchange of opinions.
1 minute, Mr. HUDECEK.
We didn't know how to give rational arguments and we were not willing to listen, even though every political science textbook will tell you that without democratic discussion, there is no such thing as democracy. Implementing that seemingly simple lesson into everyday political practice is a problem, as every such discussion is demanding and often highly unpleasant. Many of us in the Czech Republic have not yet learned either one and have no desire to learn. I have my doubts whether the situation is any different in Kiev at the present moment. If we want to create a new, better society, the first step must be a maximum respect for the law, providing all individuals and their private property with a degree of functional protection that hasn't yet been seen in the post-Soviet world. Ukraine is the only country, and therefore unique in the post-Soviet world, that, because of its history, size, and number of inhabitants, has the potential to show the Russians, the largest nation in this part of the world, that even in this part of Europe, it's possible to build an attractive alternative to the Putinesque model by offering something that it lacks: an institutionalized space for a permanent multilateral dialogue between power and society. Should you dare to undertake something like this, and there is no doubt that such a step requires fundamental courage, then you will bind the West to yourself and yourself to the West much more firmly and permanently than in any other way. If you dare to undertake something like this, the best place to start with this development is finitely Kiev, the largest city where the mere number of inhabitants, universities, museums and theaters provides a guarantee for the existence of a plurality of opinions and cultivated careers thereof. Should you dare to undertake something like this, Kiev must become once again the mother of Russian cities, and that would be the best thing that could happen to Ukraine, Europe, and in the end, even Russia. I think no greater task could be imagined today. Thank you very much for your attention, and glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.